When Karen, from the HOA, called 911 over a simple driveway dispute, our quiet neighborhood spiraled into chaos. Could we unite to overcome her relentless entitlement, or would her actions tear us apart? Welcome to our channel. Please subscribe if you want more HOA stories. I never thought something as simple as my driveway could turn my peaceful life upside down. Every morning, I'd wake up to the sound of birds singing, the sun shining through my windows. My neighborhood was quiet, and everyone seemed friendly. I took pride in keeping my home tidy, my yard neat. But lately, something small started to bother me. It all began when Mrs. Thompson moved in next door. She had 2 young kids, always full of energy. At first, it was cute to see them playing outside, laughing and running around. But soon, I noticed they were using my narrow driveway as a shortcut to get to the park. At first, it was just them biking through, but then they started racing their scooters every afternoon. The noise was getting louder, and my car often got scratched from their careless parking. One sunny afternoon, I was unloading groceries when I heard the familiar screech of scooters zooming down my driveway. I sighed and watched as Mrs. Thompson's kids zipped past, laughing loudly. It wasn't the first time this happened, but it was becoming more frequent. My patience was wearing thin. I decided it was time to talk to Mrs. Thompson directly. I walked over to her house with a friendly smile. "Hi, Mrs. Thompson. Can we talk for a minute?" She opened the door, looking a bit flustered. "Oh, sure. What's up?" "I've noticed that your kids have been using my driveway a lot lately. It's causing some noise and a few scratches on my car. I was hoping we could find a better solution." Mrs. Thompson waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, it's no big deal. They're just kids having fun. Besides, the HOA rules allow for some shared use of driveways." I frowned slightly. "I understand, but it's becoming a problem for me. Maybe we can find another way for them to get to the park." She shook her head. "I don't think so. They need their space, and your driveway is the easiest route." I felt a knot form in my stomach. I had hoped for a friendly resolution, but Mrs. Thompson didn't seem interested in helping. I thanked her and went back inside, feeling more frustrated than before. Little did I know, this small issue was just the beginning of something much bigger. That evening, as I was putting away the last of my groceries, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I glanced at the screen and saw it was Karen from the HOA. My heart skipped a beat. I had heard about Karen around the neighborhood. She was always very strict and seemed to enjoy making rules that didn't always make sense. I answered the call cautiously. "Hello? Hello, this is Karen from the HOA," she said, her voice sharp. "I've received several complaints about your driveway being used as a public road. This needs to stop immediately." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I understand your concern, Karen. I've spoken to Mrs. Thompson about it, and we're trying to find a solution." Karen was not convinced. "Well, the HOA has clear guidelines about private property. I suggest you take this seriously before we have to take further action." I hung up the phone, feeling uneasy. This was more serious than I had thought. The next day, I decided to look into the HOA rules myself. I found the property maps and legal guidelines, trying to understand my rights and responsibilities. It wasn't easy, but I wanted to be prepared in case things escalated. A few days later, the tension in the neighborhood grew. I noticed more neighbors were using my driveway, not just Mrs. Thompson's kids. It seemed everyone was taking advantage of the narrow path as a shortcut. My car got scratched more often, and the noise was almost constant. I tried to stay patient, hoping it would blow over, but Karen's warnings kept me on edge. One afternoon, as I was working in my garden, I saw Karen approaching. She had that stern look again, and I knew she wasn't happy. "Can I help you, Karen?" I asked politely. She didn't smile. "I'm here to discuss the complaints about your driveway. The HOA expects all residents to follow the rules, and right now, your property is being misused." I nodded, trying to keep my cool. "I understand. I've been talking to Mrs. Thompson, and we're trying to find a better way for everyone to use the space without causing problems." Karen crossed her arms. "I appreciate your efforts, but it's not enough. The HOA has to enforce the rules to maintain order in the community." Before I could respond, she turned and walked away, leaving me feeling powerless. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Karen said and how my driveway was suddenly the center of so much trouble. I decided I needed to gather more information and perhaps find support from other neighbors who might be affected by these new restrictions. The next morning, I went to the local library to do some research. I found books and articles about property rights and HOA regulations. I learned that while HOAs have rules, they also have procedures for addressing disputes. Armed with this knowledge, I felt a bit more confident. Maybe there was a way to resolve this without causing a rift in the community. A week passed, and the situation didn't improve. Karen continued to call me with more threats about fines and stricter enforcement. My mailbox was filled with notices, each one more threatening than the last. I felt like I was fighting an uphill battle. Determined not to give up, I decided to reach out to some of my neighbors individually to see if they were experiencing similar issues. To my surprise, a few of them were also frustrated with Karen and the HOA's sudden crackdown on minor issues. We started talking and realized that Karen had been pushing for stricter rules for a while, using every small problem as a reason to gain more control. It wasn't just about the driveway anymore. It was about her wanting to dictate how everyone lived. One evening, we met at a local coffee shop to discuss our options. "We need to stand together," said Tom, one of my neighbors. "Karen is using these complaints to get more power, and it's not fair." I agreed. "Maybe we can present our case to the HOA board together, show them that these rules are being enforced unfairly, and that they're causing more harm than good." We decided to organize a meeting with the HOA board, bringing all our concerns and evidence of how the driveway was being misused. On the day of the meeting, the tension was high. Karen was there, looking as confident and unyielding as ever. When it was our turn to speak, I presented the property maps, the legal guidelines I had researched, and testimonies from neighbors who were also affected. Karen interrupted, her voice cutting through the room. "This is exactly why these rules are necessary. We need to maintain order and ensure everyone follows the guidelines." But we were prepared. Tom shared his experience with parking issues and how the new restrictions were making it difficult for his family. Another neighbor, Sarah, spoke about the noise and damage to her property. It was clear that the problem was bigger than just one driveway. As the meeting went on, I could see some board members beginning to doubt Karen's strict approach. Maybe she was overstepping, using the HOA's power for her own agenda. The board listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions. It felt like we were making progress, but I wasn't sure if it would be enough. After the meeting, Karen approached me with a cold smile. "We'll see how this plays out. Don't think this is over." I stood my ground, feeling a mix of fear and determination. "I hope we can find a fair solution for everyone." As I walked back home, I couldn't help but wonder what Karen would do next. The situation was escalating, and I was determined to protect my home and my neighbors from her overbearing control. Little did I know, the next steps would take this conflict to a whole new level, testing our community's strength and unity like never before. The next morning, after the strange call from Karen, I sat in my living room, trying to wrap my mind around everything. Was I overreacting? Maybe I had just been too annoyed by the kids on scooters and their loud racing. But then again, I had never seen this kind of behavior from any neighbor before, especially not from someone like Mrs. Thompson, who I thought I knew well. I needed to figure this out, for real. But where should I start? I couldn't shake the thought that maybe Karen was making this all up, so I decided to get to work. I took a deep breath, grabbed my laptop, and started looking up the HOA rules for our neighborhood. The HOA had always seemed harmless, just a bunch of rules about keeping our lawns tidy and our trash bins in the right place. But now, it felt like they had a lot more power than I'd realized. As I read through the regulations, I found a specific rule about the use of private driveways. The wording was vague, but it seemed like Karen could interpret it however she wanted. That's when I realized something. If I was going to fix this, I had to be prepared. So, I made a list of everything I needed to do. First, I needed to talk to more of the neighbors and get their opinions on how my driveway was being used. If others were using it without complaints, I could at least show that it wasn't causing harm. I needed their voices to back me up. The more people I could get on my side, the stronger my argument would be. I took a walk around the neighborhood, hoping to catch a few people outside. Sure enough, I found Mr. Alvarez trimming his front yard. We had talked a few times before, but today, I needed him to hear me out. "Hey, Mr. Alvarez, quick question," I started, trying to sound casual. "Have you noticed any issues with my driveway being used by the neighborhood kids?" He stopped and raised an eyebrow, clearly interested in what I was saying. "Honestly, I've seen a couple of them go down your driveway on their bikes. It's no big deal, though. I don't mind it." "That's what I thought," I said, relieved to hear him say that. "It's not like it's blocking anything, right?" "Nah," he answered with a shrug. "If anything, it's just a shortcut for them. I've never seen it cause a problem." I smiled, knowing this was the kind of information I needed. "Thanks, Mr. Alvarez. You're a huge help." As I continued walking, I felt a little more confident. Maybe this wasn't as bad as I thought, but I knew the real challenge was still ahead. Dealing with Karen and the HOA, I could already tell she was going to be trouble. Later that week, I decided to attend the HOA meeting. This wasn't my first one, but it definitely felt different. I had a sinking feeling in my stomach as I walked into the community center where the meeting was being held. The room was filled with neighbors, most of them older, some nodding off in their chairs. And there she was, Karen, sitting at the front, like she owned the place. Her short blonde hair and the cold, disapproving look in her eyes made me want to turn around and leave. But I stayed. I wasn't going to let her bully me into submission. As the meeting began, the usual chatter about lawn care and trash pickup filled the air. But then, as expected, Karen spoke up. "I've been receiving complaints about a certain neighbor's driveway," she said, her voice sharp and accusing. "It's being used like a public road, and frankly, it's dangerous. We can't let this go on." My heart sank. I knew she was talking about me, but I had to stay calm. I raised my hand to speak, and when they called on me, I stood up. "I've heard the same thing," I said, my voice steady, "but I've talked to several neighbors, and they don't seem to think there's a problem with how the driveway is being used. In fact, I've seen kids riding their bikes on it before, and it's never caused any issues." Karen gave me a smug smile, like she already knew how this was going to go. That's exactly the point, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. You're encouraging people to use your property like it's a public space. That's against the rules, and we can't allow that behavior to continue. I could feel the room starting to shift, with some of the neighbors looking at each other nervously. I knew I had to keep my cool if I wanted to make my case. I'm not encouraging anything, I replied. I'm simply living in my home. If there are concerns about safety or parking, I'm happy to work with you all. But this is an overreaction. Karen raised an eyebrow. You're the one who's making this harder than it needs to be. If you want to be part of this community, you have to follow the rules. I could see where this was going. It wasn't about being fair. It was about Karen trying to control everything. I couldn't let her win, so I decided to take a different approach. I left the meeting early, telling myself that I would find another way to prove that I wasn't the problem here. That night, I did more research. I dug deeper into the HOA's rules and even checked property maps for my area. There were specific guidelines about private property lines, and it was clear that my driveway was well within my property's boundaries. There was nothing that said I couldn't let neighbors use it as long as it didn't cause harm. I took notes, printed out the property map, and prepared myself to take this fight to the next level. The next morning, I got a letter from the HOA. It was a notice about my violation of the driveway rule. They'd given me a fine and warned me that if I didn't stop the unauthorized use of my property, I could face even more penalties. It felt like a punch to the gut. Karen was getting exactly what she wanted. I wasn't about to let her get away with it. I started reaching out to other neighbors, hoping to gather support. And as I did, I began to realize something important. I wasn't alone in this. Several other people in the neighborhood were also fed up with Karen's behavior and the HOA's overreach. The more I talked to them, the more I realized we had the power to push back against her. And I wasn't about to let this fight go without a real challenge. But the question still lingered. Would the HOA listen to reason, or was Karen's influence too powerful to overcome? The next day, things took a turn for the worse. I was still trying to process everything that had happened at the last HOA meeting. Karen was relentless. Every time I tried to explain my side of the story, she would interrupt me, saying things like, "You're not following the rules," and "This is about the safety of the neighborhood." But it wasn't about safety. It wasn't about anything other than her need to control everything. I took a deep breath, determined not to back down. If Karen thought she could push me around, she was wrong. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit back and let her bully me and my neighbors into silence. I needed proof that this was all just a misunderstanding, something that could be solved without all the drama. I started by digging into the neighborhood rules, HOA guidelines, and even the original property maps. I spent hours combing through old documents I had never thought to look at before. And then I found it. There was nothing in the rules that said my driveway couldn't be used by others in the neighborhood. Sure, the HOA could put restrictions on public roads, but this was my private property, and as long as no one was blocking traffic or causing any serious disruptions, there was no legal reason for them to interfere. I took my findings to the next HOA meeting, fully prepared, but Karen didn't give me a chance to speak right away. She started the meeting by making a long speech about how unsafe things were getting around here, blaming everything on me and my uncooperative behavior. She made it sound like I was some kind of criminal, just for trying to keep my driveway open to a few neighbors. I could feel the anger rising in me, but I kept calm. I wasn't going to let her bait me into saying something rash. When it was finally my turn, I stood up and addressed the room. I kept my voice steady, clear. I've done my research. There's nothing in the HOA guidelines or in the property maps that prohibits the use of my driveway by others. I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just want to be a good neighbor. I could see the doubt in some of the other residents' eyes, but Karen wasn't having it. She shook her head and muttered under her breath, "You're just trying to get away with breaking the rules." I paused for a moment. I could feel the tension in the room, the pressure building, but I knew I couldn't back down now. If there's a problem with how my driveway is being used, I'm more than willing to work with everyone here to find a solution, I said, trying to keep the peace. But what I won't do is let one person, Karen, decide for the entire neighborhood. Karen shot me a glare, her face reddening. She stood up quickly, her voice rising. "This is about the safety of our children. You don't care about that, do you?" The room went quiet as everyone turned to look at me. I felt the weight of the room on my shoulders. I wasn't the only one who had been hearing the complaints from neighbors, but I was the only one who was brave enough to speak up. I knew Karen had been spreading rumors and stirring up trouble. She had convinced some people that I was a bad neighbor, someone who didn't care about the community, just because I allowed a few families to use my driveway. But none of it was true. Instead of letting Karen's accusations get to me, I decided to keep my cool. "I care about the safety of everyone here," I said, looking directly at her. "But we can't make decisions based on fear and misunderstandings. We need to talk this through like adults." That's when Karen dropped her bombshell. "Well, I've already talked to the HOA's lawyer," she said, her voice dripping with smugness. "And if you don't stop letting people use your driveway immediately, I'll have you fined. This isn't just a neighborhood issue anymore. This is a legal issue." I felt my stomach drop. My heart raced. I wasn't prepared for this. A lawyer. This had just escalated to a level I hadn't expected. Karen was playing dirty, and now I had to figure out how to fight back. I couldn't afford to just roll over and let her win. I spent the next few days researching everything I could about property laws, HOA rules, and legal procedures. I even reached out to a few lawyers just to get a sense of where I stood. The more I learned, the more I realized Karen didn't have a leg to stand on. I wasn't breaking any laws. I wasn't even doing anything wrong by letting my neighbors use my driveway. But Karen didn't care. She was out for blood, and she was willing to go to any lengths to get what she wanted. The next time we met, I came armed with everything I had learned. I showed the HOA board the documents I had collected, pointing out where the rules didn't support Karen's claims. "I'm not trying to make things difficult for anyone," I said calmly, "but I also won't allow anyone to use their influence to bully me into doing something that isn't justified." The room was silent for a moment. Then one of the board members spoke up. "Karen, are you sure about this? It seems like you're pushing too hard. Maybe we should take a step back and think this through." Karen's face turned red with rage. "You're all making a mistake," she snapped, slamming her fist on the table. "This is my neighborhood too. I won't let anyone make a mockery of it." Despite Karen's outburst, I felt a sense of relief. The others were finally seeing through her act. I wasn't going to back down, not now, and I could tell that the rest of the neighborhood was starting to see the truth as well. But Karen wasn't done. She wasn't the type to give up easily. As I left the meeting that night, I overheard her telling someone, "This isn't over. I'll make sure he regrets this." I knew I had just made a powerful enemy, and I couldn't afford to let my guard down. The battle was far from over. What would she do next? I didn't know, but I wasn't going to let her win. I had already come too far to back out now. I wasn't sure how things had gotten this bad. Everything had started so small, just a few neighbors using my driveway. But now, my house was surrounded by flashing police lights, and Karen was standing in the middle of it all, talking to officers as if she were the victim. The night air felt thick with tension, and I could barely understand what was happening. "What's going on here?" I asked one of the officers as I stepped out onto my front porch, still in my pajamas, confused and stunned. "Ma'am, we've had a report of suspicious activity. We're just making sure everything's all right," the officer replied, his voice calm but firm. I glanced over at Karen. She was acting like she'd won some kind of victory, holding a clipboard and talking rapidly to the officers. Her face was flushed with that look of someone who thought they were always in the right, no matter what. I had been through enough by now to know that I wasn't about to let her win this battle. I shook my head, trying to stay calm. "Suspicious activity? What are you talking about? It's my driveway. No one is doing anything wrong." Karen spun around, her eyes wide, and she pointed at me. "There, that's the person I've been telling you about. They've been allowing strangers to use their driveway as a public road. It's dangerous. There's been so much traffic that I'm worried about my children." I stood frozen for a moment, trying to process everything. Karen was lying, of course. She had made everything sound 100 times worse than it was. I had seen kids race down my driveway before, but that was nothing compared to the drama she was now creating. She had obviously called 911 in a desperate attempt to paint me as some kind of villain. The officer turned to me, his eyes scanning the scene. "Is that true, ma'am? Are people using your driveway without your permission?" I nodded slowly, keeping my voice steady. "I've allowed some neighbors to use it in the past, but it's never been an issue until now. It's just a simple path that leads from my house to the street. There's no danger. No one is doing anything illegal." Karen opened her mouth to speak again, but the officer raised a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. He turned back to me. "Do you have any evidence to back that up? Any proof that the use of your driveway has been harmless?" I didn't hesitate. "I do, actually. I've been keeping track of who uses it and when. It's only been the neighbors, and they're always respectful. I have a list of names and times, and I even have a video from my security camera showing no one has ever misused it." The officer raised an eyebrow. "A security camera, huh? All right, let's see it." I motioned to the porch, where my laptop sat ready for this moment. As the officer followed me into my home, I couldn't help but feel a little proud. Karen had tried to trap me in a lie, but I had done my homework. I knew the rules, and I had the resources to back myself up. Once inside, I quickly pulled up the video footage, showing the times and dates when neighbors had used the driveway without incident. The officer watched, his expression softening as the evidence piled up. When the video ended, he looked at Karen, and then back at me. "It seems like there's no reason for us to be involved here. This doesn't look like an emergency." Karen, looking furious, didn't back down. "This is exactly the kind of behavior I've been trying to stop. They're turning this neighborhood into chaos." This story teaches us the importance of standing up for ourselves and our rights, even against powerful figures like HOAs. It also highlights the dangers of unchecked power and the need for communities to work together to ensure fairness and justice. Documenting everything, knowing your rights, and gathering support from others are crucial tools in facing such challenges. Remember, one person's determination can inspire a whole community to fight for what's right. Have you ever dealt with an overbearing HOA or neighbor? Share your experiences in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories about neighborhood drama and how to overcome it.